The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
And thank you for joining this live Q&A session on sustainable marketing. Today, we will be asking Gemma Butler, author of Sustainable Marketing, How to Drive Profits with Purpose, founder of Can Marketing Save the Planet, and CIM course director, your top questions around sustainable marketing. We've already had some fantastic questions submitted, so I'll start by asking these, but please do continue to send those in using the questions tab on your control panel, and we will try to get through as many as we can in 30 minutes. So, Gemma, to kick us off, can you please give some specific examples of companies that have successfully implemented sustainable marketing strategies?
So I think to start with, there's definitely the social impact companies, which is my go-to. So the likes of Tony's Chocolonely, Who Gives a Crap, Olio, Too Good to Go, all of those ones, Swell in the USA. You know, they have the benefit of starting out with a do no harm ethos. So you know, that is absolutely, they're not reverse engineering everything, but they're definitely leading the charge. And I think they are the place that I always go to when looking at the language they use, how they set things out, the tone of voice they use. You know, they seem to focus on one thing or two things and do it really, really well. And then from a big brand perspective, you've got organizations like Natura, who own Avon and Body Shop, who have really strong sustainable agendas. And I think your communication naturally will flow from having a strong and transparent and real sustainable agenda. So, you know, and then there's IKEA who are always innovating. But I think it's important to note that given the breadth and the complexity of sustainability, you can't do everything right. And a lot of brands are not talking about it because they feel like they should be doing everything. And a lot of brands aren't talking about it because they're doing nothing. So I think, you know, right now, if we're going to make progress, then we need to start talking about it. And that's about talking about the good and the bad and you know, the successes and the failures and the progress we're making. So I think there's a real mix out there. I don't think anybody's nailed it completely and utterly, but then there is no 100% way of being sustainable. It's not possible.
Great, some really good examples there, thank you. And how do you think some of those companies, or how can marketers balance the need for profits with the need for sustainability?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? One I ask all our podcast guests is, how do you balance it? And I think, you know, first thing I'd say here is we don't have a choice. Given where we're heading, we absolutely don't have a choice in terms of needing to create that balance between people, planet and profit. So, you know, I think sustainable marketing is about sort of rethinking marketing. It's about looking at what we do instead of just selling people stuff. And, you know, how do you use your voice to inform and educate and tell that bigger, broader story? And I think, you know, people want to engage with brands with serious sustainable agendas. There's evidence everywhere around that. You know, the external pressures are growing from investors, from consumers, and from people who want to work for these organizations who are taking it seriously. So we need to look outside of selling things to areas such as the circular economy, wrapping services around our products. Sustainability doesn't mean we can't grow. You know, it's just we have to grow in a different way. And I think that's really exciting. So, you know, I would say we do have to balance it. And if you think about it, until now, the focus has purely been at profit, but profit at any cost. And that is a real telltale sign, certainly in the global north countries, because the levels of waste are so incredibly high. So we are overselling, we are over consuming, and, you know, and we're losing resources as a result. So there is absolutely an opportunity to have that balance and still grow and create sustainable markets that continue long into the future, which are currently at the pace we're going, they're not going to.
Great. And what do you think are some of the common misconceptions around sustainable marketing?
That it's about telling people that they're not allowed to do something, or they can't have something, and I don't, that isn't the case at all. I personally think that sustainability is making marketing exciting again. We've all been chucked into this void of digital where we focus on features and benefits, and we break up all of our story into tiny bite-sized messages and throw them onto platforms, and hope and pray that somebody sees them. Whereas sustainable marketing is telling a different story. It's about the circular economy has $4.5 trillion according to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation of opportunity behind it, and that's about getting people to change their behaviors. And to get people to change their mindsets and behaviors, you have to tell a story, and you can bring in social marketing and cause marketing. And then there's partnerships and collaboration around it, and that's really exciting stuff. If you're a marketer who wants to be able to do that and be innovative and build those stories and communicate, we have a massive communications challenge when it comes to sustainability, probably the biggest challenge around it. So yeah, I think it's definitely not about having less or telling people that they can't do something. I think we really need to shift that mindset away from that and move to this, working as an industry together. If industries work together, we will drive change faster as well. Think about, electric e-vehicles and the green economy. So yeah, I think collaborative advantage over competitive advantage as well moving forward.
Great, thank you. And obviously you mentioned some sort of bigger names in sustainability and examples earlier, but how could you recommend that smaller companies with perhaps limited resource or startups still make meaningful strides towards sustainability? So
I think, a lot of small organizations are looking at it and they're probably very overwhelmed with the sheer breadth and complexity of the subject. I think just making a decision to start is that first step. I would say my advice would be to go out and look at how you can work out your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. If you don't know those baseline numbers, then how are you ever going to move forward from that? There's a great website called Small 99, which is run by a guy called Adam Bastock. He specializes in helping SMEs start that journey. There's some brilliant resources on there. I would say do some carbon literacy training. We train on carbon literacy with the CIM, and that gives you a real base foundation to understand what is actually happening and why we do need to move that forward. And I think all that base knowledge means that you can absolutely move forward from there. It doesn't have to be expensive and resource heavy. And I think, again, don't think you have to change absolutely everything. Start with your emissions, start with a plan on how you're going to take your emissions down or how you're going to manage your emissions, and then go from there and just keep reading it. You'll see things, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. The BCorp website has some great resources on there about, the UN Sustainable Development Goals and how you can align your business to that. There's a free impact assessment tool on there. So there's lots and lots of resources out there that are free and open source. Can Marketing Save the Planet? We've got our learning zone with our 100 points challenge. You can do that for free. It's all free open source content on there. I'd say just start taking an interest in understanding it, and your journey will naturally evolve from there.
Really great tips there, thank you. On the other side, what role do consumers play in driving sustainable marketing efforts?
Massive role. We're all people, aren't we? We're all consumers as well as marketers, and we have to change our behaviors, and we have to engage and be open to engage. How we eat, how we heat our homes, so our energy, and how we travel are 3 huge areas where we need to make change. And I think in the grand scheme of things, we do need governments, we do need policy and systems change, but governments aren't going to be able to, they're not going to do this. In my view, they're not going to change this for us. They're not going to get us on the right track. Business plays a huge role in being a catalyst, but then you have society and communities and consumers and citizens, or whatever you want to call people, and they have a huge role to play, because it's like any marketing, it's only by people engaging with it that it's deemed as successful. And I think we need to look at how we measure social impact as marketers, And that is, you know, instead of looking at how many things you can sell and the growth and the revenue that comes from that, which are all very important, we also need to be looking at, you know, what are our audience doing, what are our communities doing, how are we building communities, how are we measuring the success within those communities. And if you take an example like Olio, which was started as a food sharing app over lockdown, it's part of now one of the biggest drivers of the sharing economy, that then moved into beyond food, into other things that people share. And, you know, it created big communities in lockdown. And when we interviewed Tessa Clark, the founder of Olio, she was talking about the fact that whilst they started out as solving a food waste problem, they ended up solving a loneliness problem over 2021 during the pandemic. So, you know, and 2020. So it really was something that has grown, and then they have advocates within there, and then a lot of their communities do the job for them, you know, and that whole piece around word of mouth marketing, as people talk about it and share it, I think is really, really important. So yeah, we absolutely have to this isn't about transactional relationships where people come in, buy something and go away and you may not hear from them for a long time. This is about constant ongoing conversation as opposed to broadcast. And I think we really need to change our mindsets and start thinking about that broadcast piece and saying, right, what do we need to tell people versus what do we need to have a conversation about, and what do we want to hear from people back? So I think they play a huge role.
Great, thank you. And how would you say a company could start sharing their, you know, sustainable practices or achievements, you know, on their website or on social, and what's the best place to start doing that?
So I think, so there's a couple of things from an internal perspective. As marketers, as a marketing function, we do need to be mindful of our own carbon footprints. So, you know, I think there will come a time where there will be carbon budgets. Some organizations are already running on carbon budgets, exactly like finance budgets. So, you know, each function is allocated a carbon budget, and if it goes over, how does it borrow from another function? Does it move it into next year? So all of that is we're starting to see that in some organizations. And I think so marketers need to be aware of their carbon footprints internally, but also in terms of sharing it. I think you can use all of the channels you use today. I think there's some great examples. Allbirds, which is the shoe manufacturer, you know, go and have a look at their Instagram page and how they mix talking about their products with talking about their carbon footprint, with how they're talking about how their sustainable progress, how they're talking about their sustainable agenda, and how they then bring their customers back in to talk about, use them as focus groups to find out what they're thinking. And Allbirds they recently launched the first net zero shoe, carbon neutral shoe, the Moonshot, and you know, they created an online brochure within that, and on every single page, on every single section, sorry, at the end of every section, they have a what we need you to do, which was pulled out from there. And you know, so that took their consumers through an absolute journey of sustainability, probably without them thinking, oh God, this is about sustainability, and it goes way over my head, and like I can't, you know, I don't understand it. It's a really, really great example. And also their social channels. So I think it's about having not just, you know, product, services, we sell this, you buy this, do that. You know, you can build that storyboard, and everything is just is a story that you're going to tell, and it's how you tell it. So I would say, you know, you can use all of your current channels that you use today, but we need to start thinking about how we talk about them and what we say. And Purpose Disruptors, for anyone who hasn't heard, go and look at the Purpose Disruptors website. They talk about advertised emissions, and they really focus on advertising and the carbon footprint around that, but also what's being said. And you know, they're raising some massive challenges to things like the car industry, the vehicle industry, where, you know, saying they shouldn't just be talking about selling e-vehicles, because if we just sell green products at the same rate we're selling other products, it's substitution. You know, we do have to consume less. So they're really driving that as an industry. They start talking about mobility as a whole, you know, other types of e-vehicles. Let's talk about public transport. Let's talk about walking. And I think that big industry voice behind things as well is really, really critical for driving change.
Fantastic, thank you. And you briefly mentioned B Corp earlier,
Yes.
but for those who might be watching, who might not be aware of B Corp, what it is, how important it is for companies, or how you could sort of get into that and become a B Corp, could you just give us an explanation on that?
Yeah, sure. So B Corp is a movement, and it's really setting the standards for how businesses need to operate moving forward, and they place a real focus on people, planet, and profit. And I believe from people I know that have been through the B Corp journey, it currently takes around up to 2 years to do. I don't know what it costs, but they do have a free assessment on their website that you can go in and you can put in some initial information. I think it takes about half an hour, and it will give you some results of some areas that you need to look at and consider before you go into the process. It's a lengthy process. It's a process that really opens your eyes. I think just going through it, the organisations and the people I know who have done it said it's probably one of the biggest and most interesting learning curves that they've been on. And you know, B Corp is in the UK, it's the fastest growing movement. So B Corp has been most successful in the UK, even though it originated in the US. But it has a kind of stamp of approval. And you know, Brewdog were a B Corp. They had their B Corp removed when that open letter and everything came out about them. There's been some controversy about some of the organisations they've let in. There is always going to be. But I think, you know, from a perspective of a recognised organisation with that stamp of approval on it, and you have to redo it and prove it every year, I think, you know, that is a great way to signal to people that you are serious about this and that you are doing what you say you're doing, which is, you know, unfortunately, there's a lot of businesses who aren't doing what they say they're doing, which is where greenwashing has become such a prolific issue. But from 2024 onwards, you know, we're going to see mandatory reporting around sustainability. The regulations and guidelines are only going to get tighter and tighter. And so, you know, and these regulations and reporting changes are happening at pace, where it takes like 5-10 years to get these things through. They're moving at like 18 months, you know, to shift the dial. And, you know, usually as marketers, we think, well, that's for the legal department to deal with, or the sustainability department, or the finance department. It's not. You know, how we talk about things can have huge impacts as well. So there's a lot of changes on the horizon that businesses will be forced down certain roads. And I think, you know, the more awareness out there of that is, that people will start to make decisions based on that as well. So yeah, I'd say everyone needs to take it very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are some of the, you know, the biggest regulations that are coming up, you know, soon, new ones that marketers might need to be aware of or do some research on?
So we have the Green Claims Code, which I still talk to go into organisations and talk to rooms full of CMOs who have not yet heard of the Green Claims Code, which is I speak from a place where I live and breathe this stuff every day. You know, it's that whole knowledge is a curse type thing. But you know, I know CIM from when I was there has done quite a lot around the Green Claims Code and highlighting it. But you know, there is a Green Claims Code. There is the digital bill coming, the new digital and consumer bill evolution coming. They're expecting it to be in play, and we'll talk more about this on the webinar in the end of this year. But the biggest change there is going to be, currently the Competition Markets Authority have to take organisations to court, which can take, you know, up to 2 years to get cases seen. This bill is suggesting that they give them the power to make instant decisions, pretty much. They don't have to go through the courts, and the ability to fine directly. And you know, that's a massive step change. And whilst greenwashing isn't explicitly part of that bill is around protecting consumers on what they see from an advertising marketing perspective. Anything that would sway a consumer's decision to make a purchase, if that's misleading, and green claims absolutely fall under that, then there's not going to be that much pushback on that. And then from a European perspective, there's the EU Green Claims Directive, which is currently being supported by all 27 member states. And you know, that's going to come into play in the next 18 months. as those member states adopt that and take that into law. And again, that is really tightening up those 6 key principles of the Green Claims Code. I think from studying most European countries and the USA and Australia and everything, the principles are the principles around, around greenwashing and avoiding it and making sure you can substantiate your claims. And again, it's not regulation for marketers, it's regulation for business, but the onus is everywhere I look is on marketers. Most of the guidelines are guidelines for marketers as the primary communicators of organizations. So, we have to be aware of what's happening. I'd say if you take the 6 principles of the Green Claims Code, if you go on the CMA's website, you'll find the 13-point checklist that you need to go through. That's a really, really strong guide moving forward for what you should be aware of. It's now no longer the legal department's role to do that, because you're going to waste a lot of energy and efficiency if you just I speak to a lot of chief sustainability officers who say they've almost become a bottleneck in their organization. They've almost become a legal department for saying you can't do that. And I'm working with quite a few of them at the moment, saying that everybody needs to know this stuff so that you can keep generating and working as a business and not slowing things down.
Great, thank you. So obviously we've mentioned greenwashing, but there is a word that's been sort of floating around at the moment, green hushing. And could you just explain what green hushing is? And
Yeah, sure. So, well, there's a couple of, so Planet Tracker describe green hushing as how do they describe it? They describe it as kind of hiding away, green crowd. There's so many terms, right? Green crowding. So hiding within a group and making sure that you stay hidden. Okay, so you're not actually doing it. Green hushing, I think, in its traditional sense, and the organisations I'm working with that come to me to talk about how do we talk about our sustainability without being accused of greenwashing because we're hushing, is a lot of organisations have retracted back into themselves and thought, as regulations come in, as fines start to become very real, I'm just not going to talk about it, which is a massive, massive problem. Because when I interviewed Seth Godin, he said the biggest thing we need to do to change it is to talk about it, and to talk about it we have to understand it. And I think that that has really stayed with me, because the knowledge levels are incredibly low around sustainability as a whole. So organizations are choosing not to talk about it for fear of being fined or being called out for greenwashing, absolutely, are just going to keep that knowledge completely within, and society won't understand it. And then those that do talk about it, it will be, misconstrued as you're telling me not to do something, or I don't understand why we're having to change what we're changing. And I think, we need that conversation out there. We need that awareness out there. So, green hushing, if everybody stops talking about it, is an issue. And this is why transparency is so key. Don't just highlight the good you're doing if there's a lot of high impact stuff. So, talk about both of them, and then at least you're being transparent about the whole thing. And there's nothing wrong with saying, we've made mistakes, or we're working on that over there. Tony's Chocolonely, they caught, their whole ethos is around stopping child labour within the cocoa industry. They reviewed their supply chains and called themselves out for, I think there's 1,200 instances of child labour they found, and then they corrected it, and they put an entire process in place and published that process on how they were going to change that and rectify it moving forward so it didn't happen again, because these things will continue to happen, and we see this all over the place. I think it's those organisations that pretend it's not happening, and try and wrap it up in something else that will lead them into problems. So yeah, green hushing is, there's so many terms out there. I think it's just, don't lie and be transparent about what you're doing. And if you have an understanding, you can raise the right questions and ask the right questions back to, and greenwashing can come from anywhere within your business. It can come from investment, if you're investing in, if you're taking investment for organizations that are essentially involved in things like deforestation. It can come from hiding data in your reports and then leaving them out. It can come from, it manifests itself. And again, we talk about that in more detail moving forward at the webinar, but it absolutely manifests in so many different ways. It's just about being aware of it. And I think that's the key for me, is awareness around this whole greenwashing piece.
And do you think it's possible to adopt sustainability at marketing level, or does it need to come from the core of the organization?
100% the core. Otherwise, you know, if you don't have it built into your core, then talking about it as a marketers, you will be done for greenwashing, because you'll be torn apart in terms of the, you know, what sits at the heart of your business. There's also that, you know, that huge piece around has to be the leaders of organizations have to believe in it and support it. Otherwise that direction isn't going to come through internally, you know, and your internal communications are just as important as your external communications. So yeah, we have to put it in, and I totally accept working with big corporates. They have to reverse into purpose, you know, into purpose and sustainability to a degree. There's this whole element of, you know, processes will have to be changed, mindsets will have to. It feels like a massive, all-encompassing, like, just can't deal with this right now, but we don't have a choice, and it all sounds incredibly dramatic, but you know, we're all seeing the effects of the weather. Anybody who looks at the weather across the world right now can see, you know, the wildfires in Canada. This is all the effects of climate change. And you know, there's some great podcasts out there. So a series called Outrage and Optimism, which talks about the bigger picture. And they recently had a guy on who is an expert in sustainable communication, sustainable marketing. So I can't remember which episode it is, but if you go on to Outrage and Optimism's website and just look at that, listen to that one podcast with John Marshall, suddenly you go, right, marketing has the biggest role of its life moving forward. But it's also, for me, one of the most exciting times to be a marketer, 100%.
Great, I love the positivity. And obviously you mentioned Tony's Chocolonely and their issue with their sort of suppliers, and they sort of changed. And is there a resource where businesses can find the most sustainable providers? Is there a resource where they can go and they can sort of audit their, you know, all of their providers, their packaging and everything, and just
I don't think there's a central resource. I think this is where the knowledge comes in, and we need to ask those questions. And it's becoming, you know, all the organizations I interview for the podcast and the people there, it's starting to be built into business. So some organizations have, you know, processes in place now where they will not work with you if you don't know your scope 1, 2, or 3 emissions. They will not work with you if you don't have a sustainable agenda. So that domino effect of those processes being in place, and you have to meet certain criteria before they'll even work with you, I think is something that needs to keep happening, because it will force businesses from the core and from the leadership perspective to make those changes. So though that's absolutely happening, you know, from you know, you won't even be considered for tenders if you don't meet certain criteria moving forward. And scope 1, 2, 3 emissions is coming in to that space, you know, and offsetting is something that you can't be considering, you know, doing, and think that's a whole different world as well. So yeah, I think from that perspective, there isn't a central place you can go. I think it's about pulling that knowledge and then going, bringing a policy or a process into your organization that says these are some of the questions we should ask if we're going to be working with certain packaging. Investors are asking it, you know, they're asking to see scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, commitments made to decarbonisation. They're looking at what your human rights processes and policies are. They're looking at what your water processes and policies are, and your waste and your pollution and all of that. These questions are all starting to being asked now, and they're becoming quite business as usual. So again, all positive and great stuff. We're going to have to put some effort in to actually start, you know, moving that dial.
Great, thank you. And I think, unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. But as Gemma mentioned, there will be a member-exclusive webinar presented by Gemma, taking place on the 26th of September this year. So if you're a CIAM member, sign up to that, and any questions that you sent in that didn't get answered today, we'll make sure that we answer in this session. Thank you so much for joining. We really hope you found this session useful. If you're not a CIAM member, but you're looking to learn more about sustainable marketing, you can head to our website and download a copy of our new Sustainability Skills Gap report, which is designed to provide marketers with the latest thinking, advice, and research to help them with the sustainable marketing strategies. And it's just a really useful resource, so I definitely recommend going to download that. So finally, on behalf of CIAM, a big thank you to Gemma and everyone who attended today. Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you very much.